Welcome to Into the Night. I'm Nari, your guide on today's excursion down a twisted path. Be careful not to get lost. Be it dark or light, it's easy to lose your way. Are you ready? Then let's begin. The Importance of Good Neighbors, Part 1. Alice Cameron lived at the end of a long tree-lined drive. Few would even notice her 3-bedroom farmhouse tucked under the shade of the hillside, and she liked it that way. "Neighbors are like fleas," her grandpa used to say. "It doesn't seem like they would bother you, but once you get one, you usually end up with several." What her grandpa said made sense to Alice. She watched the area where she grew up change from a few scattered farms to subdivisions in a matter of 10 years. Once people discovered the beautiful countryside, they told others, who told others, and so on, until the beauty was destroyed by the influx of people. Grandpa's heart would have broken to see what happened to the place he loved most in the world. Alice searched carefully for a secluded piece of property where she could build her home. She considered that 80-acre plot her sanctuary. The surrounding large tracts of land were undeveloped and owned by people who had no desire to live so far out in the sticks. They used the land primarily as a hunting spot a few weeks a year, and the rest of the time, Alice was completely alone on her piece of paradise. It's not that she didn't like people. She was a nurse and enjoyed her patients and co-workers. People enjoyed her bubbly personality and quick wit. At the end of the day, however, Alice wanted the peace and quiet of her farm. Her dogs, cows, and chickens were the only companionship she craved outside of work. That's why she was so disappointed when construction crews cleared land 2 miles down the road from her farm. Each week, progress continued on the construction project. Whatever home was being built was down a long driveway and not visible from the dirt road. Maybe someone else wants to be left alone out here too. Still, I'd rather they found another place to build. There wasn't much she could do about it, though. It was, after all, still a free country, and other property owners had the right to build homes there if they wanted to. Alice vowed to keep her distance, however. I don't need someone coming over to borrow a cup of sugar or wanting to sit on the porch to chit-chat. To Alice's surprise and relief, workers installed an imposing and elaborate gate at the entrance of the new neighbor's drive. Intricate designs decorated the wrought iron bars, and unusual insignias, perhaps Arabic or some other language, were embossed on the concrete pillars holding the gate panels. Great, looks like foreigners. At least they don't seem to want company either. A few months went by and construction activity ended. Late one night, Alice awoke to lights flashing around the vicinity of the new house. They sure picked a weird time to move in. I didn't even hear the moving van. Dead tired from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, a bleary-eyed Alice crawled back into bed. She wasn't the type to be nosy, and she would afford the new people the same respect she expected in return. Alice went about her routine as the days passed. With winter approaching, she had plenty to do. She needed to stack hay for the animals, and there was wood to cut for her fireplace. She used propane as her main heat source, but she found comfort in curling up on the couch with a cozy fire blazing in the fireplace as she watched winter birds eating from the feeders. Alice had a soft spot for things that flew. Grandpa bought her a bird identification book when she was 5, and she still loved tracking what species came to her feeders. She never had the heart to cage a bird that could take flight. To satisfy her love of feathered creatures, she raised chickens. They couldn't fly far on their own, and the flock seemed to appreciate her doting. As winter's grip found its way into the world, it dawned on Alice that she hadn't seen any activity coming from the neighbors. She knew someone lived there, smoke billowed from their chimney, and on rare occasions delivery trucks dropped packages off at the ornate gate. She had yet to see anyone who lived there, however. I sure hope it's not some weird religious cult. I don't need a Waco to happen next door. Alice imagined police helicopters flying overhead, dramatic footage on the news stations, and a sensational inferno ending her solitude. No doubt the infamy of the cult would lead to onlookers, and onlookers would lead to people thinking how pretty the area was, and she knew what that led to. No, please don't let them be fanatics or nut jobs. Shrugging it off, she continued life as it always was. She went to work and spent 12 hours on her feet changing IV drips and catheters while dealing with sometimes difficult patients, and even more difficult doctors. Her sense of humor carried her through most shifts. Most of the time, the monotony was the worst aspect of working the evening shift. One night, however, an interesting case entered the doors. A woman in her late 60s with a burning rash on her extremities was wheeled in by ambulance. Normally, the EMTs stayed for a moment, but they must have had another call because they left before anyone could speak to them about the patient. Alice had never seen anything like the woman's injuries. The attending doctor, however, had seen a lot in his 40 years as a physician. He ordered medication and told the nurses assigned to that room to apply the prescription cream and then wrap gauze around the woman's affected areas. She was to be placed under a lamp, much as the same as jaundiced babies are put under, for 1 hour 4 times a day. During daylight hours, the shades to her room were to be drawn. The woman, a Marjorie Henson, according to the papers left with her on the stretcher, was unconscious and immediately admitted to the hospital. The treatment required a number of days to complete, according to Dr. Steinman. Monitors checked her vitals and an IV drip was started. Antibiotics began as a precautionary measure. This almost looks like a burn of some sort, but her skin isn't reacting like a burn patient's skin normally would. What are those blisters? They look green. While unusual, it wasn't the first odd case Alice had treated, so she shrugged her shoulders and followed the doctor's instructions. Her best friend at work, Janice, was also on duty that night. Together they wound the gauze and placed the woman under the lamp. It took 2 people to lift her, as she was rather large. Down at the nurse's station, Janice rubbed her aching neck. "We sure see some doozies, don't we, Alice?" "Yes, we do. I've never seen blisters on someone quite like Mrs. Henson's. I've never heard of this treatment either, but Dr. Steinman was confident this would do the trick." Right before visiting hours ended, Mrs. Henson's son arrived. "Hi, I'm Lenny Henson. I'm hoping to see my mother." Alice and Janice looked at the clock. It was a quiet night on the floor, and while policy said no visitors were allowed after 9 o'clock, exceptions could be made. Neither wanted to make him leave. He looked frazzled and worried. "What could be the harm?" "Sure, come this way. As long as you're quiet, you can stay as long as you want to. There's no one in 12B tonight, so she won't have a roommate to disturb." "Thank you. You don't know what this means to me." The 2 women smiled and escorted him down the hall. The next night, Lenny arrived at the same time. He held 2 bouquets of flowers for the nurses. "I know it's an inconvenience to have me show up like this, so I wanted to bring you something special." "Mr. Henson, you don't have to do that." "No, I insist. Call me Lenny. I can't get away from my work at home until after dark. I really can't go anywhere until after dark. I appreciate the good care you are taking of my mother." "Well, thank you. We'll put these in some water." "I appreciate it. It takes a while to get into town from McGinty Road." Alice stopped. "McGinty Road? You live on McGinty Road?" "Yes, ma'am. We've been there since early last fall." "So you are my neighbor?" Lenny cocked his head slightly. "Do you drive a blue Chevy?" "I do. You have a rather impressive gait at your drive. We haven't had a chance to meet yet." "That's true. We like to keep to ourselves. We don't mean to be rude." "No, it's completely okay. I'm the same way you are." Lenny gave her a look as though he doubted something she said. "Truly, I'm not much of a socializer," Alice added. "Oh, yeah. Now I see what you're saying. We prefer to be homebodies. I'm glad you understand." Once at Mrs. Henson's room, they parted ways. Lenny stayed until nearly 2 in the morning, and throughout the evening, Alice and Lenny shared several friendly exchanges as she checked his mother's vitals. "He seems nice enough, but he's a little socially awkward, don't you think?" Janice asked as she returned from the supply cabinet with a new box of gloves. "Yeah, it's obvious he doesn't get out much. He seems shy and just different. I hope not everyone who lives on McGinty Road is that eccentric." "Oh, I don't know. I hear his neighbor is a weird one." Alice snorted. She always snorted when she laughed hard. "Yeah, that Alice Cameron is a weird one, for sure." That night, Lenny arrived at his usual time. "Is she still unconscious?" Lenny asked as he approached the desk. This time he carried 2 boxes of chocolates. "Too bad I can't find a boyfriend who's as attentive." Alice never could turn down chocolate. She gladly took the boxes. "Oh, these are the really good kind. Thank you so much, Lenny. I'll make sure Janice knows they're here when she's done in room 3. Throughout the night, the trio became familiar with each other, and conversations lasted longer when other patients had been cared for. At around midnight, Lenny stood in his mother's room with his forehead pressed against the window, overlooking the hospital courtyard. Deep in thought, he sighed occasionally. "The stars are beautiful tonight." Lenny turned to the nurses. "Do you ever just sit and stare at the stars?" "I do, sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch on a warm evening like this. As you know, we're the only ones out there on McGinty Road, so there aren't any lights to dull their sparkle. That's true. It's one of the reasons why we chose that spot to build our compound. Compound? I mean house. Excuse the slip. I'm a military pilot. I think in military terms. Janice gave Alice a skeptical glance. Lenny was short, maybe 5'6" with shoes on. He was on the pudgy side and didn't resemble anyone's image of a military man. To break the awkward silence, Alice thought she'd better say something. The military? Well, you must have traveled to some interesting places. Oh, I have. Lenny's eyes twinkled and he stood a bit straighter. I'm very proud of my service. Both women nodded in agreement. Lenny turned back to the window as his mother's dressings were changed. Most men are squeamish. Do either of you believe in UFOs? Alice and Janice finished the last of the dressing changes, and as they removed their gloves, the women shot each other looks, unsure how to take Lenny's question. I'm sorry, Lenny, what did you say? Janice had a habit of asking people to repeat something she was nervous about. Turning from the window, he faced them. It's not a typical question, I'm sure, but I asked if you believe in UFOs. Do you think there are aliens out there? He pointed toward the window and the sky. Alice, a lifelong science fiction buff, spoke first. Actually, I think it's possible. Why should we be the only beings in the universe? What about you, Janice? Oh, my mother and I have talked about it from time to time. She's a big fan of those shows. She even bought herself a telescope thinking she might spy a UFO. All she's ever seen is the occasional shooting star. She's still got the thing set up on our back deck. Your mother lives with you? Yes, she has since Dad died 2 years ago. It's just easier that way. I completely understand. My parents live with me for the same reason. Lenny patted his mother's still hand. I insisted they move in. They needed someone to watch over them, and there's so much help with the lab. Lab? Alice raised her eyebrows. Is that why you have a gate? Oh, yes. We thought security would be important. A pause filled the air. Would you like to see it? The offer stands for both of you and your mother, Janice. I have some UFO artifacts you might be interested in. Wait, you've seen UFOs? Alice nearly had to put her jaw back in its socket. I've seen them. I've been on them. Would you like to find out more? As I said, you can bring your family, if you would like to our home. I just ask for discretion. We deal with some sensitive government contracts, as you can imagine. Oh, I can imagine they'd be very sensitive. This sounds fascinating. I'm game. Before this moment, Alice hadn't realized that she sought some excitement in her life, and she wouldn't even have to leave McGinty Road to find it. I'm sure Mom would kill me if she ever found out I passed up on this opportunity, so count us in too. Splendid. When is the next night you have off work? Tomorrow, they said in unison. How about you meet me at my house at 8 o'clock tomorrow night? Just park at the gate and I'll let you in. He looked at his mother and the monitor displaying the rhythmic beating of her heart. I'm sure she will be fine for one evening without a visitor. Thank you for joining me for Into the Night, an anthology series written by Caroline Giammanco and narrated by Nari. If you like what you heard, please leave us a 5-star review. You can also contact us with the information in the description. Be sure to share with anyone you think would like to join us on our next excursion. I'll see you in 2 weeks. And remember, whether in the shadows or in the daylight, all twisted paths take you into the night.